Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about the state of employment in India and what the data from the Center of Monitoring Indian Economy reveals about it. We also give you the latest update on Chandrayaan-3 and what the mission hopes to achieve. But first, we talk about the cheetahs at the Kuno National Park. Earlier this year, 20 cheetahs were translocated from South Africa and Namibia to the Kuno National Park in Madhya Pradesh. One of the government's aims, as outlined in the Cheetah Action Plan, was that after 1 year, 50% of these cheetahs should be able to survive. But now, nearly 11 months after the first batch was released, 9 cheetahs have died. This includes 3 cubs that were born to a Namibian pair. And in addition to this, 2 cheetahs have now proven to be unfit for the wild, and another one is currently missing, raising serious concerns about the viability of the entire project. This is the reason why Indian Express's Jay Mazoomdar, who has been reporting on the cheetahs for the paper, decided to visit the Kuno National Park and talk to those involved in the project.
So the idea was to visit Kuno and check the ground conditions and to see if we can find any pattern behind these deaths. And there are a lot of allegations flying around within the project team from the foreign experts and so on.
In fact, he says that in mid-July, when 8 cheetahs had died, South African and Namibian experts had written 2 letters raising serious concerns over the way the cheetah project was being managed. In these letters, they had underlined that some of these deaths could have been avoided.
So a project like this, and given cheetah is a new species here in a long time, and also they're not used to the conditions, they traveled a long distance. So certain numbers of casualty were expected, but those who were rationed post-release, I mean, if you have cheetahs within bomas, within enclosures, which by definition is under controlled conditions, you don't really expect so many to die in such controlled conditions.
He says the goal of the 50% survival rate in the first year that we mentioned earlier pertains to the period after the cheetahs have been released into the wild.
That once they are released from the enclosure in the wild, they may come across other predators, leopards, etc. They may have road accidents, they may get into conflict with people, snared, killed. Then there are feral dogs in the larger landscape. But nothing of the sort happened, and we lost all of them to under controlled conditions.
3 cubs died due to reasons like weakness, extreme weather conditions, and dehydration. 1 female adult cheetah died after a violent interaction during mating. Another adult died after taking ill, and another due to kidney complications. And while we are yet to know about the latest death, 2 other adult cheetahs died after getting an infection, possibly due to their radio collars being wet for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, the radio collars get wet for all cats in India. There are other big cats who are wearing radio collars right now across the country, but it doesn't happen to them because, 1, they're used to the conditions, and 2, we got these cheetahs from the southern hemisphere where they develop a winter fur in anticipation of the cold climb in their country, which would be around this time. But since they're in India, so now it's the peak of monsoon, so there is that problem that they could not really get dry. So they were perpetually wet for weeks because of the increased winter fur, thick winter fur, and that may have caused the problem.
Now, during his visit to Kuno, Jay spoke to project team members, experts, forest staff, laborers, and even nearby villagers. And he found out that there were 3 major problems with the project. One of them being that the project team kept feeding cheetahs even after releasing them into the wild, which experts say demotivates the cheetahs from hunting.
So feeding cheetahs once released, I mean, this may stop them from leaving the park area, and it will make it easier for the monitoring team to keep track of them. So that could be one purpose, or it could help the teams to approach the animals closely for many management reasons. Sometimes they may need to check on them, sometimes they may need to sedate them through darting and all that. But getting a weekly supply of meat, I mean, that basically takes away the motivation of hunting and hampers the wilding process, so to say.
And he says that these cheetahs actually spent a long time in captivity. Once they were brought to India, they spent a few weeks in quarantine and were shifted to hunting enclosures, which is the last step before being released into the wild. But what's important to note is that even before coming to India, some of them had remained over a year in captivity. This was during the period when their translocation was being finalized.
So at this stage, this continued human intervention is certainly not good for them.
While in Kuno, he was informed by 2 eyewitnesses about an incident in which a female cheetah had hunted down a calf near the park boundary. The cheetah had begun eating the kill, but left it altogether when an official vehicle arrived to provide her with meat.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we learned, and it may appear surprising, but if you think about it, this location was not inside the park, so probably the brief for the monitoring team was to lure the animal back with feed. So they did not really bother to check that it has already hunted or not. So the meat was supplied. Or there could be a plan to get close and tranquilize and bring it back to the park. So we don't know, but what was the exact motivation, but it's odd.
So feeding them in the wild has been one problem. But the other is that their prey base in the area has been going down over the years.
Before visiting Kuno, from the records, we knew that something is seriously off because since 2006, I have checked records and it's all public records. Different surveys by same organizations, WII, etc. They have given a wild variation of prey base for Kuno. For example, in 2006, they said the chital density was 5 per square kilometer. 2011, it becomes 36. 2012, it becomes 52. 2013, it's 69. I mean, that's an astounding growth. I mean, I haven't come across such growth anywhere.
But he says that this growth drastically came down over the years, from 69 cheetals per square kilometer in 2013 to only 38 as per the 2022 action plan.
A few months back, now they're saying that the entire prey base, I mean, not only chetal, I mean, if all prey base together is about 15 per square kilometer. Now, nothing explains this. If, as some has claimed in the government, that strong management and good performance increased the prey base so rapidly in 6-7 years, 10 years back, then common sense says that the absence of same factors, good management and good protection, has caused the decline. To manage that, MP government is supplying Kuno with cheetals from other forests, Pench, Seoni, 700 plus, let's say at least 700 cheetals have been dumped in Kuno in last 1 year or so. But the problem is that if they still record such low prey base, then you have to ask that where the cheetals and other prey like sambar or wild bears going? I mean, we can't keep pouring in a leaky basket without fixing the holes.
And Jay, do we think that poaching is the reason why the prey base in the area has been declining?
Yeah, I mean, it's known to all in the field of conservation that this belt, this entire Kuno area, Guna, Shirpur district, Jhansi, and if you go north, we have tigers in Sawai Madhopur. This is a traditional hub for poachers. In the sense, there are 2 kinds of operations. Almost every village have enough guns and snares and other apparatus to go and hunt for meat, which they consume. And also at another level, where they go and poach commercially. I mean, the main target in this landscape is, of course, leopards who are present in a very high number. And sometimes they also venture out to Ranthambore and deep inside MP for tigers. So the idea is that it's a known threat that Kuno is always a prime target for poachers. And cases have been registered also. Only last year, before the cheetahs arrived, there was a leopard poaching case which was investigated. Only yesterday, another FIR was filed close to Kuno for hunting. So this is going on. But the good thing is that the cheetahs do not have any particular commercial value in that sense. So they may not be targeted by the poachers directly, but if the prey base is diminishing at this rate, it will surely have an impact on the population.
Okay, so far we have talked about the fact that these cheetahs were being regularly fed in the wild and that their prey base has been declining due to poaching. But the third major problem that experts have pointed out is that the top management have very little scientific training and most of the monitoring staff and vets are too inexperienced. Talk about how that has contributed to this problem.
So the idea that we gathered from the letters from the South African and Namibian experts, 2 of them have since disassociated themselves from these allegations, but others stand their ground, is that the monitoring teams don't have the experience or expertise to handle such a big project. So you have a young biologist, you have a vet, and you have forester and a driver and a couple of local contract staff who are basically villagers. So the impression is that not all of them have the experience or expertise. And it is not about involving the foreign experts or maybe one particular scientist. I'm talking about Dr. Jhala, who conceived the project and then was dropped sometime late last year. But India certainly has the professional research expertise and experience to handle this kind of a project. No doubt about that. The question is, do we have the best possible resources on the ground? Or did we handpick mostly those who would always toe the official line? I mean, even at the cost of the cheetahs. And also, what's the project's goal now? I mean, a few cheetahs somehow surviving on human support, or a breeding population of free-ranging animals as was originally promised? And what is feasible at this stage at all, and what are not? I mean, these are the questions. Time has come for me to answer some of these questions honestly.
And Jay, you write that out of the 8 cheetahs that came from Namibia, 3 were raised in captivity, and 2 of them were never even released outside their enclosures. And government officials essentially knew that they would not survive once they come to India. So why did they decide to bring them anyway?
There is no official ground for that. I mean, nobody can deny, and nobody has, that they knew that these cheetahs were raised in captivity and they were not really fit for the wild. Now, that's strange, and the only explanation that we have, and that too from this government sources and in India and some of the Namibian sources, is that there was a very hard deadline which became non-negotiable. So they had to bring cheetahs on a given date in last September 2022. And only 5 suitable cheetahs were found. Specially prepared Boeing 747 was waiting, and did not appear appropriate to just take a small cargo of 5 animals, so they decided to take those 3 along. It's a bizarre story, but that's what we have learned.
And Jay, after all this, how do we see this project going forward?
Now, any fieldwork in Kuno has become a little bit difficult since there is an official gag order on the ground and on everyone who are linked to the project. And also a general atmosphere of fear and desperation, given the deaths and the global attention. So there has been quite a bit of finger pointing in the last few days, and there is also some discord between the foreign experts and the Indian team, and also among the foreign experts. And there are 2 possible outcomes in the management, that they all come together for the cause of the project, or those who have raised these issues, they are completely sidelined, and which we will know probably in the next week or so, which way it goes. And as far the cheetahs are concerned, the ones already in the Boma, already captured, they are the ones the project is left with, because the one missing cheetah has remained missing for too long to give us any real hope that it will be found. So this population will remain in the Bomas. 6 of them, they are without collars because they had some serious infection. The others are still with the collars. But there is no plan, we learned, to release them back in the wild, at least not before the temperature drops and the rains stop completely.
And next we talk about the state of employment in the country. For a while now, the current government has been emphasizing that it wants to make India self-reliant, or Atmanirbhar.
आप भी इसी तरह आत्मनिर्भर भारत के लिए अधीर बने। आत्मनिर्भर भारत पूर्ण आजादी का मूल स्वरूप ही है, जहां हम किसी पर भी निर्भर नहीं रहेंगे।
Through this message, the government has tried to indicate that India should not rely on other countries for its economic growth and should build its own capacities. But there's also another side to this.
Yeah, so the other side is also the whole idea that of the role of government in the economy.
That's Indian Express's Udit Misra, who writes on the economy for the paper.
So the overarching framework is that of minimum government and maximum governance. And minimum government essentially means that you cannot sort of look at government as the main provider of jobs or creator of jobs. So the idea is also that, most of the job creation will happen in the private sector, that we'll have entrepreneurship, people will start their enterprises, create more jobs and economic activity. That is the whole idea. And which is where this government has made a lot of focus that we need a mindset change where people just look at the government for jobs. Instead, they should think of themselves as job creators and job givers instead of job takers.
In fact, Udit points out that at the height of the debate around unemployment in 2018, the then BJP President Amit Shah had said that it is better for a youth to earn a living selling pakoras instead of being unemployed.
हाँ, मैं मानता हूं कि बेरोजगारी से तो अच्छा है कि कोई युवा मजदूरी कर मेहनत कर पकोड़ा लाए.
And what's interesting is that 5 years later, data from the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy shows that India is doing just that. And by that, we don't mean that they're selling more pakoras, but that increasingly Indians are engaging in self-employment, especially after the pandemic. In this segment, Udit tells us what this data reveals. Udit, this data by the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy looks at the number of people employed in India. And to understand this better, let's discuss the different categories of people employed currently. Talk about what these different categories are.
Yeah, so when we looked at the CMI data, we found that, say, between January to March of 2019, that's a year before the pandemic, to January to March period of this year, over this period, the total number of people or total number of Indians with a job has gone up by 8.6 million. Now, this is not such a big amount considering the population growth, but all the same, it shows a rise and the number overall is now back to pre-pandemic levels. So it's a heartening news. But when we look at the disaggregated data in that, there are 4 categories of kinds of jobs that sort of account for most of the jobs. Predominantly in India, most people are either categorized as small traders and wage laborers. The next big category is farmers. The third big category is salaried employees. And the fourth biggest category is business, and which is typically any enterprise, so you could call them entrepreneurs of different kinds. And we are seeing that essentially it's the business lot, the entrepreneurs, which has seen a trend which is going up. They have actually accounted for 8.4 million of the 8.6 million increase. So all the increase has happened in the entrepreneurial class. But there is a story within this larger trend also.
Right, because even the business category is further divided into 3 more categories. You write that there are businessmen, the qualified self-employed professionals, and the self-employed. Talk about what the difference between these 3 categories are.
Yeah, so there are 3 ways in which you could think about entrepreneurs in India, at least as the way CMI collects this data. And it is important to understand that we are looking at CMI data because that gives us the most updated and comprehensive survey-based data. There is no official data comparable to it. So CMI categorizes entrepreneurs into 3 categories. One is this typical businessman, which is what we understand often. These are people who are rich, who leverage a lot of, take a lot of loan, lay down a factory, employ a lot of people. They have a lot of new technology. Now, this category of so-called business class, as it were, the rich business class. Then the second category is qualified professionals. These are professionals like a doctor or an architect. They have a technical degree. They can start a shop or start a firm and provide those services. And the third category is self-employed people. Now, these are the people who are perhaps the worst case scenario because they are poor, they do not necessarily have the best access to money, and they are essentially doing things which are out of desperation because they're not getting any other job. So they are self-employed, not necessarily always out of choice, but largely because of lack of economic prospects.
Right, they don't have the kind of money that businessmen have, and they don't have professional degrees, which also requires resources to get.
Exactly. So this matters in the sense that there are 2 broad ways in which it matters. One is that it limits their ability to earn more. So their earnings potential is much lower. If you're an astrologer or a taxi driver, there are limits to how much you can earn at a broad level. And secondly, you cannot also employ other people. So these are like, single individual enterprises, right? If somebody is actually selling tea, maybe he or she may employ her kid and grow up that enterprise that way. But these are very small enterprises. So there's a problem there when we look at self-employment. And what the CMI data then shows is that if we look at these three categories, the categories of qualified professionals and the category of businessmen, the rich businessmen, both of them have seen a secular decline over the last 5-6 years. And it is only the self-employed people, that category has grown. So when we talk about India's overall numbers going up, and saying that businessmen are going up in that category, the truth is that it is only self-employed people who are going up. Entrepreneurship is not of the nature that often gets referred in terms of unicorns, which are, $1 billion dollar valuations. But the real numbers on ground are of people who are involved in very small enterprises, single person entities doing, taxi driving or astrologer or things like that.
And Udit, would it be fair to say that this is also the category that earns the least amount of money?
So one would imagine that this would be the lowest strata of our economic category, and this would not be a watertight compartment. And people should understand that the same person who for the first half of the year might be involved or for 6 months be involved as a laborer in an agricultural field might also then work somewhere as a tea seller or a taxi driver or rickshaw puller somewhere during another lean phase of the farming season. So these things, don't think these are watertight compartments, but in terms of understanding where they lie on the economic scale, we are talking about fairly poor people who are struggling to get by.
And Udit, what does it say about the Indian economy that only the self-employed category is rising out of all the categories of the people who can be employed?
Yeah, so the fact is that it reflects poorly on the economy, that you do not have, while a lot of headlines will be concentrated on unicorns and big businesses, the fact is that when you look at data, macro data, that number has been going down. So the number of people actually categorized as businessmen who are well-to-do has been coming down. And similarly, qualified professionals have been coming down. And the rise in self-employment basically reflects poorly because it shows that people have no real opportunities for jobs, of regular jobs, either in those bigger businesses, or they are not qualified enough to have their own enterprise, which is well to do in terms of a technical skill set. And they're just getting by out of desperation doing one thing or the other. So that is why we are seeing that the rise in this whole demand for safety nets, higher pensions, job guarantees, unemployment benefits, all of this has come because there is considerable stress. This government itself also has been giving free food to 80 crore population in India. And that's a substantial portion of India. So that is a tacit acceptance that, there is distress. They don't have money for food. So obviously it shows that there is stress in the market, in the ability for the economy to create jobs and prosperity.
And in the end, we talk about Chandrayaan-3, which is aiming to become the first Indian spacecraft to make a soft landing on the moon. Over the weekend, Chandrayaan-3, which was launched on the 14th of July, completed another major milestone after it entered the lunar orbit on Saturday evening. In this segment, we speak to Indian Express's Anonna Dutt about this development and what lies ahead for the project. Anonna, with the Chandrayaan-3 entering the moon orbit, how far along are we in this journey?
So basically we have crossed a very important and difficult milestone, which is getting captured in the lunar gravity. So if you can imagine, the spacecraft was slingshot from the Earth. You're throwing something towards the moon and it has to get captured at a very precise angle, at a very precise time, at a very precise speed to ensure that it gets into the orbit. And it's a very difficult maneuver, which we've done in our previous Chandrayaan missions. Nonetheless, it's important that we've achieved it. And with this, I would say 3/4 of the journey is over. Now, all that's left is for the spacecraft to slow down in the lunar orbit. Another series of maneuver like we did in the earthbound phase would also be performed around the moon, which will reduce the orbit and decelerate the spacecraft in preparation for the powered descent, which will likely happen on August 23rd.
And Anonna, is there anything that scientists at ISRO fear right now in terms of how the landing will go?
So, it is a challenging mission. And if you look at the track record of moon landings, it hasn't been great. Every country that has attempted it, there have been issues, not just, landing, but also just reaching the moon, which we have successfully done 3 times. This is the 3rd time we have reached the lunar orbit with 3 missions itself. So none of our missions failed to do that, which in itself is a great achievement. But now with landing, of course, I'm sure after the last experience, we are still scared, and it's a good thing. We have to be prepared for all scenarios. But yes, ISRO this time is better prepared because we have experience from the previous mission. We have an orbiter in around the moon right now, which has been taking great pictures of the lunar surface. We have created a map of the surface, which in turn has helped this mission to precisely know where it would land. So all of that is in favor of us, but it's still a difficult task.
Now, we understand that if we are successful in landing softly on the moon this time, then we would be the 4th country in the world to do so. But what are the things that India aims to achieve through this project, and what do we hope to learn about the moon itself?
So this will be the first mission to ever land near the south pole of the moon. And this region was carefully selected by ISRO for the previous missions as well, because the southern pole of the moon has a lot of craters which remain in permanent shadow. So that means there is no sunlight that goes within these craters. And it would be a great location to find this water ice which has previously been detected by other missions. This is a very important finding because the countries that are looking to go for, exploring other planets have to likely use moon as a pit stop. So you go to the moon from Earth, refuel, get refreshed, and then go ahead in your journey ahead. That is the plan, of course, for the future. So that's why moon is an important target where we're looking for water. And it was, in fact, Chandrayaan-3 which piqued the interest of all the countries again in moon, because after the Apollo missions, after the Cold War, the lunar missions had slowed down. There was, of course, China attempting to do a few, but it was Chandrayaan-3 which discovered the presence of water and restarted this whole, interest in moon for everybody. And apart from water, what we're also looking at is minerals that might be found on the lunar surface, which are a precious resource and can also help in these, when we're making pit stops for the onward journey, if something can be, for example, used for fuel. So these are the things that we are looking for right now from the moon.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.